Thank you so much. Right, so just a quick introduction. I don't know if you want to go for Sebert.
Yeah, I can go first for Sebert. Sebert is a full-service commercial landscaping firm. So my role there is the landscape architect on staff. I do all the designs for all of our branches. That's going from south to Bolingbrook, north to Milwaukee, out west to South Beloit, and Madison as well. So it's a pretty big swath of the area. One of our big things is that we do have our headquarters in Bartlett is a LEED certified building. So it has green roof, water reclamation, and we can go into that. We have a whole design tour for exactly that. And then Bluestem, our sister company.
Yeah, so Sebert was founded 41 years ago by Jeff Sebert. His son, Eric Sebert, founded Bluestem about 11 years ago, and we focus on native landscapes. And so while Sebert does a lot of those traditional and ornamental landscapes, the turf care, they recognize that you can't just have a turf care company go in and plant natives and call it a day. The maintenance, the skill set, it's just a totally different ball game. And so starting a separate company that would focus specifically on native landscapes. So Bluestem builds, restores, and maintains natural areas, typically around stormwater detention areas, as some of you have done work in. And certainly in compliance with the McHenry County Planning Department stormwater management requirements and ordinances. Those are typically the areas where Bluestem's working, as well as these, open landscapes that, are traditionally planted with ornamental plants that we can transition into native landscapes. And so that was a big part of this project. So let's get into a little bit of where we started. Essentially, the library reached out to us in, I think, 2023. There was like some chatter. 2024, they really said, we're ready to move forward with the landscape project. They had received a gift from one of their former friends of the library members, and a gift after their pass. This was Rosemary Baton, and she had specified that she wanted it to go towards landscaping and the creation of a new outdoor space. You can kind of see here the landscape was mostly bare mulch, I would say. The turf grass in the front was, in healthy condition. There's a lot of yews, boxwoods, and other, non-native and exotic species that were introduced. And it was very stagnant. The idea was that year-round it kind of was just green and mulch. And they knew that they wanted to create something more and actually utilize this space as an asset to the library. That, the library isn't just once you walk into the doors, but as soon as you arrive on the grounds, that there's space for, all the things that people come to libraries for community connection, for learning, for exploring, and for, that immersive experience that you get when you open up a book. And so that was kind of what the library came to us with. They were talking about, I'm trying to think what, some of their design vision, or you want to go with,
Before we get into the design vision, okay. For Woodstock Library, it's actually kind of an interesting site because we are landlocked with residential, and there's actually a auxiliary lot across the street. This was a possible extension of the project, but there's a little bit more engineering involved, so it might be something in the future. But our main goal was directly around the library and really creating that inviting space, like you were saying, before you even enter, that you have something where you feel like, yes, this is someplace I want to go into, so you're excited before you even open the doors.
As we were getting started, we knew we need to start with a design process. This wasn't just, let's grab some plants and start putting them in the ground, let's pull out some of the existing. No, we needed to really dive into what was it that they wanted, where, there's a process, or the kind of 3-step process that I learned a couple of years ago. It's, where are you, where do you want to go, and how do we get there? Some people call it an appreciative inquiry, or a talanoa dialogue is the term used in Fijian culture that I learned about at a conference years ago. This process of just understand where we're at first. What are the current amenities and facilities that they have at the library? And then, okay, do we like any of them? Do we want any of those to be part of the redesign? Do they all need to come out? Can we keep any of them? Can we reuse them in different ways? What does that look like? And then where do we want to go? What is our goal for this site? How do we want it to be? And this was where we'll get into this on the next slide, but the library had, or the library staff had talked to other libraries. They'd seen some webinars about this idea of getting more invested in the natural world. That, again, you open up a book and you're transported to a new place. I think of like Magic Tree House, if you read that as kids, or to your kids. Where these books, you go into a tree house and you open a book and all of a sudden you're transported to the dawn of the dinosaurs, or to San Francisco in the wake of the earthquake in the 1900s. All these places that you can be transported to through a book. And how can we use this library to transport people into a really immersive experience? We looked at, who are the people on this committee? If you're putting together a design project, make sure you have the right people on the committee. There's been times where I'm on a committee, but none of them have the power to actually sign off on the project. They're all like, okay, yeah, we all are interested in the native landscape, but none of us have any say on whether it happens or not, right? So you want to make sure that you have, someone from leadership, someone on the decision-making side that's part of that conversation from the get-go. Or alternatively, that they've given the committee the reins to do so. And so there were folks on our committee. We had Carrie, who's the circulation manager, and Martha, who's the assistant library director, were kind of the main points of contact for us instead of the executive director of the library, Nick. He was involved in a lot of the final approvals. We had Friends of the Library, the nonprofit organization were represented, with Marty, who's actually out here in our bookstore. And we had library trustees who serve on the board, our elected officials who were also involved, Jess Beverly. These people all were part of the process, and having those people that, some people who are part of approving the funds, some people who are part of raising the funds, and some people who are part of that ongoing management and understanding how the library works, so that we can really figure out how are we going to use this space. That was helpful when it came to, hey, we're going to be installing this feature on this day. Is that going to interrupt story time, where there's kids running around in and out of the building? And so having these people invested from the beginning, and them having the ability to make decisions on behalf of the library, saying, yes, we want this % native planting. Yes, we want to include a water feature in addition to the landscape elements. Some things like that cost extra money or have design implications, they were able to make those decisions. We talked about, we had a plan with maintenance in mind, and so we did put together, as part of the design process, a operations and maintenance plan that specified exactly, the timeline, the frequency, and these target species that would be included in that maintenance plan.
How far out did your maintenance plan go? Was it like for establishment phase, or did you go beyond that?
I would say we went beyond. So, for example, with the pavers, we talked about how frequently you need to refresh the sand in the pavers, and that there's a different timeline if you use a traditional paver sand or like a polymeric sand. And we talked about the implications of either. Well, with the polymeric sand, it kind of like has an adhesive component to it, and so when you put that in the pavers, it sticks and sticks around longer. You don't have to replace it as frequently. In the case that you do have to replace it, because eventually it does break down, it's a polymer, it takes a lot more work to do it. So you have to really prep the area well to get it to get that old sand out so you can put in the new sand. And so it was decided that you know what, paver sand is not that expensive. Doing that every 2 years makes more sense than doing a full kind of overhaul of the pavers every 10 years. And so that was part of the conversation, as well as with the native planting areas. What does this look like to establishment and with some of the seeded areas, and then moving forward, how will we maintain this? You know, while Bluestem and Sebert obviously, you know, are going to be part of this project for the long term with the library, we didn't want, you know, we were contract for the design, not the install originally. So there was no obligation for them to use us long term, and we don't want our clients to be like, well, it will only be successful if I'm part of this forever. You know, I don't want to tie the success of the project to myself or my company. They need, you know, that's part of what they're asking for, is to have all the tools they need to do this successfully. And so that was part of that planning. We also talked a little bit about some of the materials that would be used. We wanted to use as many locally sourced materials as possible. We talked about getting local artisans involved. We talked about, you know, where we'd be sourcing our plants from to make sure that they were successful in this ecosystem, that we weren't importing, you know, a tree from Seattle or something to plant here. We're sourcing from local nurseries as well. Why don't you talk about the
Design vision?
Yeah.
Yeah, so part of the design vision, especially once we got into working with the library and getting to understand their needs and wants, and it was really this idea of libraries as gateways to nature. And for me, that was a big inspiration point, because especially when your client has a good idea of what they're really looking for, and that for me is kind of like a really interesting inspiration statement. And creating spaces not just for kids, but for adults, to allow all the patrons that are coming to the library to have something that they can interact with, that they can enjoy. And a big portion was the event space, was that we have a allotted amount of money for this. We have something that was pledged for creating a space for us. And it's kind of interesting because there were a couple iterations of how the space would look. How would it be used? How much can we get out of a space that is essentially, it's a paver patio? That how many different activities can you do in one small space? And is there any way to utilize it, change it, or can we do something through just a small change that we can add another activity to it? And a lot of this was also again, about the gateways to nature, is that it was about bringing people not only into the library, but outside the library, and to kind of experience nature in a way, because that's one portion of it. We'll talk about it later, about the story walk, where it's not just we're putting a pathway through some plantings. We're actually bringing the library outside, so you can experience both things.
Yeah. Some of the other requirements that the library gave us were about safety and access. So they wanted this, all of the paths and spaces to be accessible and compliant with ADA requirements. And so that came into effect with our path. I think we'll see a little bit on the next slide, or on some of the following slides, that we changed some of our plans throughout a different iteration. I should say, Jen changed the plans, and I met with them as we went through the different requirements. That was kind of my role in the process. And I think you had like 7 to 9 different versions of the plan from start to finish throughout this maybe 6-month planning process. And some of the things that we wanted to ensure was that as we looked at the grade of the slope, making sure that that crushed gravel path was going to be level enough for wheelchair access, that it was wide enough for wheelchair accessibility, as well as that the materials themselves are something that someone with any sort of mobility challenges would be able to access. And so that meant, putting some edging in so that the gravel was a little more contained. And so again, if you're in a wheelchair, that you don't just roll off the path, that you can stay a little bit more contained. That also has maintenance considerations with that as well that were better. The safety bollards were were probably something that you maybe didn't even notice as you walked in today, but there's these kind of ornamental stones in front of the library as you walk in, again with enough space that you can access with a wheelchair or cart, but not a car per se. They talked about a couple examples where someone, they were probably making a donation to the food or books to the library, and they backed their vehicle right up to the front door. And some of the staff were a little concerned about that because you hit the wrong pedal and all of a sudden you're through the glass doors. And they're like, my office is a straight shot back from that door. We got to have something here. What it also serves as is now, you're waiting outside for, someone else in your family to finish grabbing their materials, or they're doing research and sit inside. You want to take a phone call. Now you have this extra little space right at the entrance where you can sit for a little bit on some of those benches. I picture myself just sitting cross-legged on one of those benches reading a book, or taking a phone call that you don't want to take inside the library. So there's, again, it's this multi-purpose amenities that are built into it. We talked about closing off the Baton space with some sort of gate system. That ended up being removed later on, but as we thought about, you got 2-year-olds coming in for story time, they're going to be running right in and out of this space to go run into the parking lot, because what else would a 2-year-old want to do at story time but run into moving vehicles, right? And so we ended up using a seat wall as a function instead that kind of contained most of the sides, so there are still open entrances and egress. The bike rack and bike repair station to support alternative transportation, something that's really important for the connectivity of the Woodstock Library to other amenities within the community. And then we also, this was something that will be probably a future project, is the teaching gardens. There was a desire to, on kind of the northwest corner of the property, just next to the Baton space, to have a teaching garden. It ended up being really shady and kind of on a slope there that wouldn't have been really conducive to a herb or vegetable garden. So that's kind of a future plan of where can we put that space so that there is the availability for example and demonstration gardens here on the site. The educational signage that went in, as well as the story walk that we mentioned.
And getting into the design, we're also given kind of things that have already happened at the library. So one of them was the fact that there was a large addition to the library. So they had existing architectural plans, which I will say, when you're planning things like this, having architectural plans that are up to date and also have grading on them is extremely beneficial. Another thing was that they had already had a architect come in and had already given some kind of concepts for the Baton space. So that's where the Moongate concept really started, was that in some of their renderings they had these with addition to the sound baffle as well. So there were already some existing designs and existing ideas that kind of got the ball rolling a little faster, because it was also, okay, these are elements that they're really interested in, so we can bring those into the new project.
Who here has heard of a Moongate before? Anyone? Okay. More than us when we had, when this was the first time we had ever heard of a Moongate, when they said, yeah, we're gonna have a Moongate in here. We're like, I'm sorry, a what? So it is an archway that is shaped like a Hobbit door, essentially, or just the idea is that it's essentially a full circle, except for where it's level with the ground. There are some that are actually raised up at like a full circle that you would have to step through, but again, with accessibility concerns, we didn't want that. They're not super common in the US. There's a couple more in like the UK that I've seen commercially available. This isn't something you'd buy on Amazon per se. This was very difficult to source.
Yeah, and it was, a lot of that became part of the design iterations, where there are products out there that are very simplistic Moongates, where they're just large arched metal, but it's usually pretty thin, it's not substantial, and a lot of them are made for having vines and things grow over them.
Maybe
And-
residential use, certainly not,
Yeah.
you know, a public space that was going to have as much traffic as we have.
And some of the design iterations, we're talking about, like, do we do something where it's stacked field stone? Like, do we do a legitimate stone arch up here? Do we do things where it's a mix of metal and stone? And this is before we really got into the nitty gritty of what this arch is going to be.
Yeah. And just to quickly touch on, okay, so you're thinking of, I'm going to do a commercial landscape in my, at my office or at my workplace. What do I want to include? As Jen said, if you have any, like a plat of survey and then a grading plan or existing building plan, providing that to your design team or having that available when you're doing your design is going to give you the kind of the ground verification of what is going on your property, so you can design around that. Also including some concept images or inspiration photos. We can talk about, well, I want a formal garden or a cottage garden, but those words do mean different things to different people sometimes. And so having a photo that you can share of, like, this is our vision for the site. If you've got a slogan like Gateways to Nature, that's as cool as that one, include it, but just kind of have the, you know, do some of that internal work with yourself or your team before you go out to, okay, how are we going to do this? You got to figure out where do we want to go before you can figure out how we get there. Okay?
Yeah.
Excellent. Is that something that if they haven't done it, that you as a consultant would walk them through? Like if you felt like they weren't ready, do you have like ways to walk them?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
This is just one of those where it's really, to help, like, especially if you're bringing in a design team, that it really helps that designer understand where you're coming from, especially having images where things like, if we're on the residential side, like things like House, they're a good site where it just has all these inspiration images. And it's, even if you don't have like an existing architectural plan, like there's, like I showed you earlier, there's the satellite of the, there's the satellite view where I can build I can do a layout off of this. So it's having an architectural plan and grading plan. They're not the be all end all, like that. If you don't have that, I'm not gonna work with you. I've worked with plenty of places where I've walked on site and this is the start. This is all I have. That's all I have. So, and especially for clients, having them understand kind of where they want to go with things is sometimes a bit of hand-holding on our end, where there's a lot of that step-by-step understanding, okay, you're saying gateways to nature, how much nature? Like, what does nature actually mean to you guys? Because I could say, we're going to do full 100% natives around the entire thing and we're going to go nuts with it. Or is this something where we're going to calm it down a little bit, and we're going to bring in something that's a little bit more on the what's being called naturalistic gardening, where it's a mix of native and non-native plants. And it's things where it's like we can still stress the natives, but we're still going to implement some other shrubs and other plantings because those things have a use in the space as well. Yeah.
How much does like utilities come into play? Like, do you know where the utilities are when you start designing?
Yes and no. I have, depending on the scale of what we're doing. A lot of times when I'm dealing with a smaller site, I'm not really worried about the utilities at that point because I'm just trying to get a design on the page. Things like this, where I do have a full done architectural plan. On here, I know where they have it laid out where water and electric come into the building. And sometimes I can even tell, like, as I'm walking around, I know that's where the gas hookup is. Like, I know where certain things are coming in. You can pre-mark with Julie, where it's something where you can just ask them for that. A lot of times I'm not working with that as the starting point where I'm trying to avoid all those things, because for a lot of these utilities, they're underground pretty good. So they're not going to affect you unless you're planting a tree. And it might be something where you know this is where the water comes in. I'm not going to plant a birch that is going to try to infiltrate. I might avoid trees in certain areas because I know this underground utility is here. But for the most part, Utilities, unless it's something major where I'm dealing with easement issues, or we're getting into specific fuel and gas, where there's stuff where I've done out in the far western suburbs where we have full-blown gas, like this is like BP lines that are coming through, that it's like we have different things that I have to worry about on the like on the permitting side. That's where I'll look at a little bit more when I'm on doing residential and smaller commercial. It's more of we do some site adjustments if there's something significant, but
Yeah.
So like you wouldn't want bricks over where like any of the utilities went through or anything like that?
yeah, I try to avoid those where I can. Sometimes it happens, and you know that if it's on your property, the utility company will, I mean, you're going to be messing with your own utilities. Moving utilities, depending on what they are, can be a pretty big hassle. But yeah, some structures and things, but it's like in easements. I try to make sure, because that's a big thing right now, is doing plantings in parkways and doing a lot of that. We're doing natives and that and all that, but you have to have the understanding of a parkway is a utility easement. So if there's ever a burst pipe, some sort of cable or any sort of issue,
Fibers being added. you
yeah,
know?
they can just dig in that thing, pull it all up, do whatever repair they need to do, and they can just put it back. I just put the ground down, and they might put some grass seed down.
Yeah.
So it's certain areas where you know not to have an understanding of your stuff might get wrecked because it's a utility easement, but then there's other areas like if we did have some major utility going through a paving section, it's on the property proper, and we can work with whomever is going to be doing the work and figure out from there.
For example, here, we made sure that we had extra conduit running under the bait and space before we installed that. So we looked at, okay, what's the future use? They're going to redo the front parking lot next year. They might add cameras to the parking lot. They might add an EV charger. What conduit can we run under this this brick patio before we put it down so that you're not redoing this next year? And so things like that. I will also add that, Jen, somewhat uniquely, sometimes you're using a designer who has just designed an architect or an architectural firm. Jen is very much tied in, and her desk is right next to the desk of the supervisor who does the construction installs. And so there is this understanding that, we can design everything we can possibly think of. Something will always change on the ground, and there is some ground truthing that has to be done by the implementation, by your construction team, and there is a little bit of flex that happens there. And so, yes, we're going to move this, 1 foot or 2 feet to the left or right to avoid a utility or a tree root for, a canopy tree that we're keeping on site. We don't want to damage those. And so that's something that, I think we have an understanding of when we're doing design that your architectural or design team may not always be thinking about. And so asking them about what's the maintenance, what's the long-range planning, how does this go into effect, who's watering this, things like that being in the design stage is important.
Yeah, and that's one other thing with how Sebert and Bluestem as sister companies work, is that I'm on the design build side, where there's some landscape architects that are very much in the design sphere, and then they sell the design and they might consult. For me, I know that these are the plants we're going to have to get in 6 months to a year. This is the material we have to get. I know where it's going to be sourced from. So there's a lot of items where, especially like when we get into later things in the design, where it's like I was already calling up companies and manufacturers saying, I need this product, what's your lead time, what's the cost, what's this? So I'm already getting those things initially, because I'm like, I know I need to build this. So I have this in the back of my head that it's like, we have to install this. I'm not going to make it difficult for myself. So I want to have as much information as possible. Even if we have to do site adjustments. And site adjustments, no matter what project you do, something is going to be, it's never true 100% to like plan inch to inch kind of thing. Like it never works out that way.
Some of the other design inclusions that this client reached out to us about was, again, the focus on native plants and nativars, sensory inclusions. By the children's area, we have kind of a sensory garden, and so we include plants that probably wouldn't have been in a true native garden. We have like, I think it's like what kind
lavender.
of lavender is it? It's like Lavacious lavender. So it's got a funky name.
Yeah. Everything in that area
yeah.
has a funky name.
We have Fire Chief arborvita because it's like a bright orange arborvita. It looks like it's almost dead, but it's like, but then you go up to it and it's alive. And so it's just something silly and whimsical over by that children's garden to combine with these butterfly chimes that we have and the rocking horse statue that's over there. Please go out and play the chimes. I do every time I walk past, and just kind of enjoy the sensory experience that you have over there versus in other parts of the garden. You know, we talked when we were planning this presentation, like there's different adjectives that we used to describe each kind of phase of the garden as we go around. They're not the same feeling, but they're connected through with repetition of plants and structure. Other features that we included were those outcropping stone, the seat wall, the water feature. We wanted to have, you know, again, except for tasting, which we're trying not to do so much with young kids and library patrons, but you know that you're seeing, you're feeling, you're hearing. You can touch and interact with all of these plants. Using dynamic layers so that there's seasonality to the site in terms of the color and textures, and then enhanced screening to the north and east with their neighbors. Especially, we took out a lot of buckthorn and honeysuckle from the north of property line of the library, so that we could access an additional 5-10 feet of land that they owned. When we did that, all of a sudden you can see right into their neighbor's window. And then we built up this baton space that's now, in some areas almost a 5-foot elevation increase, and now you're like lined up with their window as you stand in this section, and we're like, okay, we're gonna bring a lot of people into this area. All of a sudden, we feel like we are in these people's backyards where they were kind of tucked away before. And so having that screening to be just good neighbors, it wasn't a requirement because this wasn't a new construction, and that honeysuckle and buckthorn had no place there in the first place, right? But being part of, this is a site within a community that a lot of these community members who are direct neighbors, they're coming over to the library through their back gate, a couple times a week. And so we want to be respectful, give them, access and consideration in this part.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a referee on what qualifies as a native or indigenous plant?
Yes, that is
We're
my
almost
next
there.
slide.
Oh,
Native plants versus nativars versus cultivars. What is it? Because there's kind of it's like, well, if it grows really well here, is it native? It's like, okay, I moved to McHenry County. I grew up in Lake County. Am I like a McHenry County native after a certain amount of time? Because, I bought a house here, so now I'm a McHenry County native. But I wasn't born here. So at what point do you become a native versus a tourist or a visitor, right? Or a transplant? And so it's kind of the same thing with plants. And so a lot of our understanding of what is a true native plant goes back to, you heard all about Lewis and Clark and that they did something big in the 1700s where they walked a long way and took some canoes and made a lot of mistakes and shot some bears. They put in their journals almost like every plant and animal that they saw, and they described it, they took samples, and that was all brought back to Thomas Jefferson. And that was the intention of their tour. They were just going around and botanizing, sign me up for the next one. That sounds like so much fun, just canoe across the whole, anyways, sounds fantastic. And so a lot of what we know of what native landscape look like is still from a cultivated landscape, a landscape that had been managed since time immemorial from indigenous people in the United States, and the plants that were here before the arrival of European settlers and colonization across the landscape. we know that some of these plants come from Europe because we have records of when they were brought over. Just like, you hear maybe of the story of in Central Park, I think a pair of every bird that was included in a Shakespeare play was released into Central Park. So we know where some of these starlings came from. It was from that when someone said we should have Shakespearean birds in Central Park. Are they native to Central Park? No, those were clearly introduced. We have the story for that. Others not so much. There's plants that are kind of naturalized into the landscape. Plantain is one that is commonly considered as a naturalized plant. Not the plantain that you eat, not like tostones plantain, but there's a plantain that grows, it's maybe 1.5 feet tall. It grows kind of on the edges of turf areas or sides of sidewalks. And some people call that a naturalized plant. Some people call English ivy a naturalized plant because it just escapes into the natural area. That's not what we're calling. So when we talk about native plants, we're typically, I'm not necessarily reading Lewis and Clark's journals, but the practice is coming from those settler journals and records that go back to the early 1800s, when people were European people were first encountering these landscapes and what they noted in English written language for us to interpret and read off of. We're also going back to the scientific names of these plants, and so. There's like a straight species is going to say just the name of the plant. So Echinacea purpurea is a straight species because it doesn't have any extra pizzazz to its name. Next we have the powwow white wildberry, which has this like set of letters and numbers. That's probably because it's a patented plant, and so that set of letters and numbers is tied to its patent. Anything in the little apostrophes is a cultivated variety that was pulled out. Some of those are from like some sort of specific like gene splicing technology that's out there. Some of it is just, hey, that plant's cool. That one's different than the others. I planted 4 purple coneflowers and one's acting weird. Let's see if we can grab the seeds off that one and make it do it again. And so it's selective breeding where a mutation was found in nature and then selectively bred for, just like we get flat-faced pugs and other things that are selected and super sweet apples, right? And so that's part of how these different varieties are introduced. Then we have certain ones like this Echinacea hot papaya, which if you see now, instead of having a cone with seeds at the top, you have more petals. And so this is an example of a cultivar that is now having a different impact on its environment substantially as compared to, the purple coneflower and the powwow wildberry coneflower. They look fairly similar to our eyes. Research into how different insects and pollinators interact with these has shown that the powwow does attract some pollinators, typically not as many as the true purple coneflower, especially our native pollinators. Maybe you've got honeybees that are enjoying the powwow wildberry. But then you get to the Echinacea hot papaya, and pollinators may be landing on this, but they can't feed off of this plant. So this plant doesn't have those reproductive organs that are producing the pollen and the nectar. So all of a sudden, they're coming to this plant thinking, all right, buffet time. Wait, it's closed? What happened? And so there's no, this is an example of a cultivar that, even though it's technically this made-up word of nativar, so it's a cultivar of a native species at least, it's not providing those same resources for our native pollinators. It doesn't have the same place in the ecosystem. And so ninebark is another species that is commonly used as a landscape plant, as a cultivar or nativar of it. We have at our office a massive, it's probably like 12 by 12 native ninebark. It's gorgeous. It's got these cool, like pinky purple flowers right now. it's also massive, right? And so thinking about, okay, where at the library could I put a 12 by 12 shrub? I don't really have a spot for it because it doesn't grow, in a nice like vase shape like our serviceberry or red buds. It's just kind of like blah. I'm sure that's great for the camera, sorry. Forgot I'm being filmed right now. And so our native 9 bark is something that I would love to plant everywhere. I have a hard time finding a space for it in a cultivated landscape. Because again, this is, I can't just place this here and let it go wild. I have to treat it as, okay, we need people to be able to get in that door over there and see out that window and walk around that sidewalk. And so some of these native plants that we would, that are that adaptations that are made for or bred for are based on making it a dwarf, so a smaller size, or changing the appearance of it. So let me just double check what my whole list was. So it could be a dwarf, so it's smaller or more compact. It could have the double blossom or double bloom is what this hot papaya is. It could have larger flowers on it, so like the hydrangea, the native hydrangea versus like an Annabelle hydrangea, bigger, bolder flowers on that. Yeah?
Sorry, I stepped out to the bathroom, so you may have addressed this. Do the nativars or the like dwarf, the cultivars, like, are there benefits less? Sorry, this may be a dumb question. Less than the native plants, like in terms of like pollinator benefits and things like that.
It
Like,
really depends on each cultivar has different has what traits selected for, right? It's like, well, my blue eyes are worse at on a sunny day at the beach, but maybe they're better in a darker environment. I could see, and so there, all these traits that are selected for, they're selected for a reason. Typically, the straight native. I think in most all cases, the straight native is going to have the most pollinator benefits because that's the one that is co-evolved with the pollinators, right? Again, our native pollinators.
Got one more question.
Sarah and Jen, I appreciate that explanation. I think that's a great
Yeah.
explanation of why you might use nativars or cultivars
Yeah.
instead of natives on occasion. Would you, in your professional opinion, though, urge people to use natives if they can?
100%.
If they have the space because of our insect apocalypse that we're having now?
Yes,
Yes.
and I'm I'm a bit on the kind of, I don't know if call it on the fence about it. For me, with natives and nativars, a lot of it is about what is that native plant doing, like its structure and things. Because again, I'm on the design side. I'm looking at what is this plant aesthetically, and I understand there are the eco value and everything else. But for me, a lot of times using cultivars, because my whole thing, it's about the don't let the perfect be get in the way of the good. Is that for some people, it's a residential site. You're trying to encourage people to do natives, and you tell them, well, you have to do all straight natives, and they're all gigantic, and they're not really suited for our, let's call it our urban soils, because what we have right now are not native soils. And even around here, even for new sites that are being built, those aren't native soils either because they've been farmed for the last 50, 100, 200 years. So we're kind of in this point where it's trying to bring these plants in and try to encourage their use, but it's also understanding they're not behaving how they do out in the wild. That they now it's, for me, I encourage things like the wild berry coneflower, and there's a whole series of these where it's just that it's a small coneflower. It's 2 feet tall. It handles being put into our fertile garden soils. Versus if I put a purple coneflower just right into the soil, I've seen them at 5 feet. They're taller than me. So it's yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have so many questions.
That's fine.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about two things, like in extension, I'm just searching our database, and like we don't have any of the cultivars or nativars, like we didn't even talk about them, but it occurred to me, like design-wise, in terms of like, could it be like a gateway plant for people to get used to the aesthetic like of native plants who may?
Yeah,
Does that
and
make any sense?
yeah.
A lot of our projects, like we're ripping stuff out after a year, or like throwing a hydrangea in the back, because like we'll put a rain garden in, and then the community's like, oh, it looks terrible.
See, and that's,
Disgusting.
oh yeah, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I'm fine. If one of my projects looks bad, I'd love for people to tell me about it because then I can improve later on and figure out what went wrong. But especially about a rain garden project, a lot of those where they get a little unwieldy, they get long and leggy, a lot of those issues come from the fact that we're bringing in good garden soil into those things. And you're giving so much extra nutrients and things to these plants that they've really adapted to be in high competition, moderate levels of fertility. So they're used to being really integrated with other plants, where they show in these remnant prairies, you take a 4-by-4 square and it's insane how many plants are all like just together, side by side in that
Seen
small
20
space.
plus in a 4-by-4 area.
Versus like if you're doing like plugs and then
Yeah.
you've got all the.
Right, and you think you're planting, okay, I'm doing 1 per square foot.
Or even
You got-
6 and 12 inch on center, as much as that's a really tight planting and that can get very expensive, you're nowhere close to where it is on the actual wild portion of it. Like if in nature, that's so far apart, there's too much space between things. So it's kind of making, it's finding that space where I am putting in plants that are good, but it's also looking at it as, but we still have the aesthetics of a garden. And I think it's trying to do that tightrope of like, where can I utilize the big plants? Where there's some areas where I do use purple coneflower in this. And that's because I know I have wider spaces. I know I can do a little bit of height. And if it does take off a little bit, it's not going to be a huge problem. But there's other areas like in the front where I'm going to be using a cultivar because I need to keep it low and keep it a little more aesthetic, like more for the human eye than I am for, say, the pollinator eye.
So in this project, I think most library landscapes are cultivar dominated. And so instead of saying all of this is bad and get rid of everything, again, it's kind of that easing into, and I want all natives. My whole job is like push native, and those true, those straight species, native species is what I would love to plant, and just, seeing like this whole thing with a really, 60 plus pollinator species, native grasses. But big bluestem, the grass that our company's named after, in these garden soils can exceed 8 feet. And when I have windows at a height of 4 feet, we're blocking out a lot of the visibility, and the function of the building is taken, it's kind of taken away by the landscape. So we need to find a way to use the landscape as a vessel to demonstrate these native species while still maintain the function of them. And so we wanted as much native as possible. I think we achieved it, between native and nativars, we're at 75% of the project was planted with native or nativar species. Ginger wine 9-bark is an example of a plant that was used. Again, it's a dwarf species. Unfortunately, the benefit for the, maybe not the pollinators, but some of the caterpillars and things that eat the leaves, they're probably not going to eat this plant. A lot of people look at, I don't want the bugs or the aphids in my garden. Well, where are they supposed to eat if you have turf lawn or nothing else, right? And so this is a species that, maybe in a more true native planting we would not have used. The color change of the leaves to make them more of that bright burgundy, that fall color, is called an anthrocyanide. And it's basically like a tannin. So in wine, it kind of has that more astringent taste, maybe a little more bitter. And so if you're a little baby caterpillar and you're inching along looking for the best tasting leaf, you're not finding it on the ginger wine 9-bark. And so that is something that has an impact on our pollinators. That we did unfortunately use this plant in this planting. That's something that in a more perfect planting probably would not have been included.
So we were talking about natives. What's your regional area to classify as native? Are you looking at county plants, Chicago region, state of Illinois native? What's your?
It depends on the project for sure.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
whose take do you want?
Yes.
Because for me, native for me can sometimes mean the U.S. and Canada. I'm looking at Americas. And I attempt to try to keep it towards that. Let's keep it to Midwest. Let's keep it regional. Midwest Ground Covers and the company, I think it's Natural Garden Natives.
Yep.
Their whole thing is that they source all of their seeds, I believe, within 40 or 50 miles of the nursery.
In
So
St.
there's
Charles.
so their stuff is very hyper local. So with them, I know there's kind of that inherent. I know that these natives are going to be
Local eco type,
very,
yeah.
very local, versus sometimes where I'm using things like Amazonia hubrickii,
The blue star.
narrow-leaf blue star. That one, that's technically native to New England. So I've noticed a lot of my natives are in the east of the Mississippi, north of the Mason-Dixon line, just for regional, because it's really tough to get a wide palette of, and especially if we're looking for seasonality, that sometimes can be a little tough. And because if you look at a prairie in springtime, there's very little going on. And it's a lot of the starts of plants. And you might get it here and there, but it's not everything. Versus in the fall, all of a sudden, it's just colors everywhere. We can get a lot of color going. So it's kind of my whole design philosophy is a lot of mixing. So when you see that I am putting in stuff that's from Europe, that it's because that's fitting a niche that I'm looking for, or a structure of the plant. So Sarah's gonna have a different view on natives
Yeah.
than I do.
And I'm going to ask the client as well. Do you have a preference for a certain ecotype? Are we what is the native range we're looking for? We can look at for the Chicago region and look at this book this thick, this reference book, and find what counties is this plant found in a native ecosystem. We can also look at climate projection models and see that some of plants that are from southern Illinois are creeping their native range further north. And what does climate adaptation look like? That's something that I am not the one making that determination typically. Chicago Regional Trees Initiative is a great resource that's doing some of those studies into that of, what trees will be successful as, again, in our urban soils and street trees along the Illinois Tollway or IDOT roads. What's going to be a good tree that's going to be successful here in these drought conditions, getting zoomed by vehicles? So there's this the wind that's hitting them, the soils that are constructed soils that they have, the narrow medians. What's going to be a tree that is successful here? And sometimes it's a catalpa that has more of a southern range than here. But right now, if you're driving around and you see the blooming catalpas, it's like, that's a beautiful tree. Would that make sense for this landscape as we look at climate adaptations for the future? And so it's very much a conversation with the client. My goal would be to have, Illinois native plants, maybe some southern Wisconsin plants in my native palette. All right, so we're going to look at a little bit of the of the landscape plan. We're going to kind of brush through some of the species that were used as well in each section. And then we'll kind of talk a little bit about, or as we go through, we'll talk about the site preparation, the installation process as well. Okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on, so it's easier when it's all kind of split into sections. This is really when we were doing the design discussions, was how are we dealing with each space and each need, and where are there certain areas that need something different than something else. So going through, we kind of separated it out into the Judd Street frontage, the children's area, the main entrance, the bait and space, the North Meadow, and then the employee parking lot and rest area. So going through, I'm not going to go too in depth with a lot of stuff. For Judge Street, it was a lot more about keeping repetition as well as something that's a little bit more formal. So it's making something so that as you're driving by, it doesn't feel like you were talking about before, where it's like that aesthetic, where you want to make sure it looks put together and you're not thinking, why is no one taking care of the library? So it's putting things together that, yeah, we're putting in native plants and native cultivars where, like the blue-eyed indigo, that as a straight species that's native here, and it's a fantastic perennial that's pretending it's a shrub. Like, I find it just the most interesting plant that's out there, and it does a lot of work for you. And actually can handle some salt, which I'm actually surprised by. But then other things where these are cultivars, but a lot of these are making things smaller. So like the purple dome New England aster, it's smaller. The black-eyed Susan, smaller. Like, all these things are meant, there's the same color as the actual species, but it's just a tinier plant. And when we're getting into shrubs, this is where things could get a little wishy-washy, because we are bringing in limelight hydrangea. This is not from here, this is not a native, but it's a structure plant. It's something that's familiar, it's something that will have a little bit of color change when we get later into the year. We already talked about the ginger wine 9-bark, but the thing is with this, with the repetition, is that we are going from because we do have these little, I can show it in pictures later, because here we have these interesting stonework that's in the front, and making a repetitive design with that, where we keep those hydrangeas going through, and same with the evergreens, keeping the long stretches of evergreens going along the windows in the front, so that even though we do have some of this very mixed perennial design, we still have this look of more of that formality and more towards that corporate site, where you can get away with a little bit more. So this was one of the renderings I created in Photoshop when we were first showing the design. And then this is out front today. We'll go take a walk so we can see it. And this is coming around that corner. So now we have it more planted. We're putting in those blue-eyed indigo that are going around the circle, and having signage. So we're bringing in a lot more interest to the space. Moving around to the children's garden, this space is kind of interesting because it was about bringing in a lot more of those oddballs and letting me use some cultivars that are a little weird. So like your blue grama grass, like it has these kind of interesting like eyelash or mustache little seed heads. And we were talking about the fire chief arborvitae, having this reddish orange on the top, and having things for, because again, this is the children's area, having the chimes that they can play. And again, this is a place where we had a lot more color and interest, where it's things that are native, like our butterfly milkweed, which is one of the most striking orange plants that's out there. But then also having things like caramel coral bells, where it's, again, it's just foliage color, but it's a little weird, but it's really fun. Then the sensational lavender, that's your sensory item. And this was the rendering that I created, so they had an idea of what kind of would be out there, what kind of colors, what kind of structure. And then today, everything was planted in the last, let's call
This
it
was
6 to 8 months.
Yeah,
Like about
8 to
8
10
months.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everything is still growing in, still establishing. But with this was about getting a lot more color and interest, because we even have like the dianthus, which has these interesting little like blue grassiness, but it has bright pink flowers in the spring, so it's another little oddball plant. And when you guys all came in, you guys all saw the main entrance. So this is when we were talking about doing the outcropping stone, but also up front, it was looking into doing a lot more seasonality. So we have things like the snowflower chokeberry, and our chokeberries, I think, are a great alternative to burning bush, because it actually has a flower in the spring, and it has good fall color, so we get that red coming back in. And same with the nearleaf Amzovia. This is the Amzonia hubrickii. It has a brief blue flower, and it has this wonderful feather foliage, but in the fall, it just goes crazy bright yellow. So you do have that seasonality, so you're not just hoping that it's the next flower, we also have foliage interest. Mm-hmm. And then one of the requests was doing a water feature, so it was a basalt column fountain, but then we're getting into also plants that are non-native, like the calamintha, and then I guess on the maybe native is yarrow.
There is a native yarrow. The moonshine yarrow would not be.
Is not in that. Okay. I just know I've seen stuff about there's like 2 Achilleas. And then for one of our focal points, because we actually removed a lot of Bradford pears that were out front, and bringing in an American hop hornbeam, so something a little different, still native, just so we could have a nice large tree out front that we can have as that that kind of focal point as you're pulling in and as you're walking up. So this is the rendering when we were working with the library initially, and this is it today, and with a focus on the fountain. And a little bit of this is also with bringing in a little bit of the formality. We're starting to loosen up because we're getting a lot more perennials, but making sure that we're getting these little highlights of color, that I know there's pink from the allium up here, the pink from the allium is coming up again. So we kind of get this idea that we're still repeating things and keeping up repetition, and a lot of the plantings that are happening out front are still happening as you're coming all the way around the building. The bait space is not quite finished. We're still waiting on the shade sails, so when we go out there, we can use our imagination when we get these shipped in. A big part of this was obviously making the space, making something useful, so it's not just for one big event. We were talking about story hour. We're talking about doing movie nights out here, as well as having I think it's one of the only places I have annuals are in these raised beds out front of this thing, at the entrance of this. So we have a lot of opportunities to get all different levels of patron, whether it's a kid or an adult that can be interested in this space. And a lot of this was about screening and making sure that we're not bothering the neighbors too bad.
Yeah, I had a question earlier, and then we moved on to the whole
Yeah,
question about
sorry.
natives and cultivars. But I just had a question, great, you took out all this buckthorn and honeysuckle.
Yeah.
Did you have, negative feedback originally from the neighbors of, oh my God?
They said,
we're losing
what are
all
we
of our
planting
great-"
here instead? Is there going to be something planted here? And we said, yes, that's totally part of the design. So the design was in place before we started clearing that. And so we were able to say, like, no, you can look at this, you can count how many trees are going to be in your backyard. And you'll see that we are, providing that coverage back in.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
And I think they sent letters to their neighbors as well.
oh yeah, there was a lot of correspondence, especially with the neighbors that are directly around this.
Which is something that every project should consider. No, again, it's your property. You can do what you want, but you're going to want your neighbors to be at least not against your project, ideally.
And not surprised.
Right. Well, surprise.
Yeah.
They can be surprised, but they shouldn't be trying to cut down your new trees or trying to put up move your sprinkler off it because they don't like it. So having that conversation, saying, hey, we're doing this. You know what? Maybe while we're out cutting our buckthorn, it would make sense for you to cut your buckthorn down. What do you think? We could share a contractor. And so doing things like that is something that you can help to kind of lightly encourage them. And just, people want to know what's going on. And that helps a lot with getting them involved in the project.
Yeah, and that's especially with public spaces,
Yes.
is that making sure that there is a local buy-in at minimum, and to get people to understand what we're doing, because that was a large portion of this was when I was making a lot of these renderings. A lot of these were for displays in the library before we even started. It was also part of getting donations and things, but it was also about outreach and saying, hey, this is what we're going to be doing in 6 months. So to tell everybody about it. And I know for a lot of people, seeing that plan means nothing. I understand majority of people, they see that plan and they don't know what it means. There's so much going on. But when I show them this, where I'm saying, this is the idea, then I can get a better buy-in to say, oh yeah, that's what we're looking at.
There's signs upstairs right now about a new roundabout that's being put in on Lake Avenue, I think. And so you can, this library is a community center where people come to learn about what's going on around them. Having this, if the library doesn't even tell you what's going on with them, it's a taxpayer-funded institution, there's going to be a lot more negative feedback. And so managing some of that by having these conversations, having the transparency and showing off what their plan is and getting some of that feedback. There were some feedback sessions where we heard feedback from some of the neighbors, from some of the board members of what they thought. the other way that we got community involved was with the moon gate. So again, I told you I'd never heard of this thing, and they're like, Sarah, get me a moon gate. How big? About, I don't know, maybe 10 plus feet wide and tall. Okay. I called around to probably 10 or so different metalworks, garden centers, fabricators, anyone I could think of who would, and again, everyone's like, you want a what? You want a what now? What's a moon gate? And you know, no one was interested in this project until I reached out to McHenry County College. And I spoke with someone, Professor Gaylord Rodeman. He's in charge of the welding program there. And he said, this would be awesome. And you know what? I'm going to get Professor, Violet Ludick, who's in the graphic design department, and see if they'll design it for us. It was incredible. So here were some of the students doing their designs. We actually, so they said this would be such a cool assignment. This will be great homework for the students. And I was like, I didn't mean to give them homework, but okay, if you say so. And the students were thrilled. They're like, can we give you like a presentation and like do a whole pitch? And the library's like, yes, this is fantastic. Can we give you multiple options? Yes, you can. You can do all of that for us. And so these were some of the options that were presented. There was, my favorite actually was probably that dragonfly on the lower right, in the center photo, if you can kind of make that out, that the student did. The students talked about the different kind of design process that they went through even. And we ended up with this student on the right here, Ash. They came up with this design that incorporated birds and grasses, a bird on a twig, and some of the native wildflowers at the bottom. So then we went and took it to the welding department. And what I thought was really cool was the welding students were in the room when we had this kind of design presentation, along with the library staff and committee. And the welding students said, well, you know, how wide is that cutout? Because our lasers can only cut this as a minimum width. And okay, we talked about doing a quote across the top, and even if we just said welcome, well, when you leave, is it going to say welcome as well? Is it going to say goodbye? Is it going to say is it going to be like just backwards welcome? What's it going to look like from the back? And so we realized that, for the light to hit this the way we wanted it to, it needed to be mirrored through so that the bird, a bird could, like in theory, fly through like a fighter jet or something and do some acrobatics through that bird. And so it would be, the light would go all the way through that. And so that was something that from a visual perspective, these design students now had to see the real life implications of, well, we got to design something real. We're not using an AI model. Like this is something that will be physically made into a product.
And one thing, when they started this, all they received from me was how large the panels we need, the size of the panels needed, and kind of the layout they were going to be in, as well as kind of the approximate size that we needed the moon gate for. So we really had no full construction drawings for this. Like this, pretty much all of this came from the students. So for me, it was more of just, I handed a guideline, and I was ready to take kind of like a basic thing that they had and like, okay, now I can do construction drawings, and all of a sudden they're like, it's done. And I'm like, all right. Or it's like, okay, I didn't know that you were going to do the entire implementation.
So the students then went forward and welded this themselves. You can see some of them cutting this out. They add a sign saying that, crediting their class. And then this is our designer, Ash. I think the day it was installed or the day after, taking a picture under their creation. So that was just a really cool moment to be able to bring the community into a project for the community. We didn't want this to be some, astroturfed, rubber stamped, oh yeah, they paid us to put this out and it's for you now, enjoy. We wanted this to be something that was by and for the community, and this was such a cool way to be able to do that, was getting the students from McHenry County College involved, again, with 2 classes over 2 semesters. It was a really cool experience too, and really built on the whole idea of the project. And so this is it today, the moon gate as well as the sound baffle in the background.
Yeah, so it's a little walkthrough going underneath.
And those annual beds actually are being maintained by the, I think, Woodstock Garden Club. So it allows them, okay, you want to plant your ornamentals, do that right here, and don't put too much of that into our garden. All right, so now we get into the real hardy native area in this north side.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'll let you continue.
For this area, which we're calling the North Meadow, we have a lot of existing large trees, so we have a lot of shade in this area, but then we get into a somewhat sunnier area. And the whole idea of this was to really bring people into this space. Originally, when we first got here, it was just turf and buckthorn. And you really couldn't use this space, and I really think it wasn't even just an underutilized space, it was truly unused. So for the pathway, we're doing this rustic granite, sometimes called rotten granite, and it was trying to work with the grade lines so that we're not doing anything where the slope of the path is going to be too steep. And technically, when we're getting in about this area, it's not quite ADA approved. It's a little tight there, but we actually went through a couple iterations with this because there were some sloping designs where we're going in and out between the trees, and when we were initially talking about a teaching garden in the far corner, putting in stepper paths so you can get all over the place. But the problem is it's a little steep in that area, so it kind of brought in the design a little bit. And then, do you want to talk about signage?
Yeah.
Or?
And then these two signs, the woodland edge trees and the prairie roots, were installed around the area to make sure that people who were encountering this again, this is meant as an educational learning space. And so let's learn about the native species that are planted on site. Let's learn about the native trees on site and learn to identify them and find them in other spots. So, these were both designed by Pulse Design Studios. They do a lot of the native plant signage at parks and in natural areas throughout the region. They're out of, I think, Midlothian, Illinois. But then we took their template design for woodland edge trees, and we said we're going to do only trees that are on the property on this plan. And so we included, the trees that are present here. We added the black walnut, we added the hickory that are present here, and the redbud. With our Prairie Roots signage, we want to talk about those pollinator interactions as well, and make sure that we recognize the wide array of bugs that you may see, and get people looking for the life on the landscape, that they weren't just like, there's a bee out here, this is bad. But see, no, right from the start, you know that the bees are what we're looking for on the landscape. We want the butterflies, we want the little beetles and things like that. And we want to look for that as we're outside exploring. I don't think I have a slide that talks about, but this is where the Story Walk came in. So Story Walk is a project that came out of a librarian in Vermont, and the idea is that instead of just reading a story stationary, we can go for a walk as we go through the pages of the book. And so as we go outside, you'll see it, but basically a children's book, typically under 20 pages with not too much text, is photocopied or kind of pulled apart the pages and laminated and put onto these signs that are going to be outside for, it could be a month or a quarter that this book is on rotation. And then as you walk down the path, every couple feet, there's going to be the next page of the storybook. And so it's somewhere where, okay, you want to get outside, you want to read to your child, but you can't do them both at the same time. Here you can, and have it be something that you're walking along with the characters in the story. And so they've got a really fantastic book out there right now that hopefully you get a chance to read, or bring a young person in your life to read as well.
Sorry, do the books rotate? Is that what you said?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so that's on the at the rate and pace that the library decides. There's one of the St. Charles Park District sites they had an author write their own book, and so it's a permanent installation, but it's a book about their park. And so Knox Park in McHenry also has a story walk. Some of them are bilingual, include learning other languages as you walk along. So it's a really neat way to get different immersive. In this area, this was all planted, the kind of speckled and dotted areas are all planted with seed. And so that has, I think, 30 to 60 different native species, depending on which seed mix we used in the different areas. Again, these are all straight native species. This will take a couple years to grow and fill in. So right now, you'll mostly see our cover crop.
This was one of the renderings. And then today, stuff is still coming in, but
Turf repair is still needed. So.
yeah, we're still doing some turf repair. But yeah, it was being able to utilize this entire space so you don't feel like, because I think before they were just having chairs on mulch. So this is a big improvement for them. And when we were talking about plant selections, we are at about 75% native R. We did break it down into native plants and native cultivars, so it's 32% native. So, and then we also have with introduced that we do have about 25% introduced plants. So it is a mix throughout. This, I don't believe this includes the seed mixes.
Correct. This does not include
So this
seed
is
mixes.
only what was on my planting plan, like my plant list. This does not include the native seed. So that native number should be pumped up because of the native seed. So I think that's it.
Yeah, and then that's it. If you want to contact us about any questions on the project, you have my email address there, and happy to entertain more questions afterwards. But I think the exciting part of now is let's go out for a tour.